Hey everyone, and welcome to the tutorial series for the NPC Manager system. This is going to be a separate standalone quick start guide that is going to be going over some of the basic features of the system to basically get you going as soon as possible. We are not going to be looking at every single feature or every single setting that is part of the product. This is going to be just the basics, and here's what we're going to cover today. How to create an NPC. We're going to take a quick look at all of the major settings on your MPC controller. We're going to create a point of interest, which is going to have some stations and an entrance and some spawners. And finally, we're going to create a profile that we're going to apply to that NPC and create a very simple routine to have our NPC go around and do its thing. So if we go ahead and jump into Unreal, if you just open the project for the first time, you're going to be right here on the level showcase. And you can see that the project NPC Manager has all of the different folders. Again, this is a standalone, so we're going to be creating everything from scratch. And then if you're interested, you can take a look at the deep dive videos that are going to be coming later on. So first things first, let's go ahead and go to the maps folder here. And we're going to open level tutorial. And this level was specifically made for the tutorial series. You guys should have it. It's going to make things a lot easier because we're not going to be wasting time placing actors in the scene. We're just going to dive right in. So the first thing we're going to do is create our NPC. And let's go back into our root folder here. Go to Blueprints, Characters, NPC. And right here you see it's called BP NPC. This is the base class for your NPC. So all we're going to do is right click here and select Create Child Blueprint Class, and let's just rename it NPC Quick Start. Not a very creative name, but it's just going to do. And once you open the NPC, you'll see that it's basically the same thing that the parent class has, but here we can just change some settings. So right here on the viewport, you see that the NPC is fairly simple. You have the capsule component, the mesh, basically what you would get from a regular third-person character. There are two things additional here that we've added. We have the HUD component here, which is going to display the name of the NPC and the HP. There's a little HP bar here. And then we have this interaction trigger that we have here. Notice that we have a very simple volume here. I am not using AI perception. That's a much heavier component, and I'm trying really hard to get these NPCs as performant as possible for your project. And finally, and most importantly, we have this component inherited called Comp NPC Controller. This is basically the main brain, what makes your NPC basically work. So you can see it's a very simple component that is also going to make it very easy for you to create your own custom NPCs later on. So that's pretty much it. We've created our NPC, so let's go down here and drag him into the scene. And we have this guy right here. And if we go back to our outline here, now we're here, let's go ahead and take a quick look at all of the settings that we get with the controller. So you select your NPC in the world, and right here on the details panel, go ahead and make this bigger, select the component, and you'll see now that we have all of the different settings here. So the first setting, and the most obvious, and I have with all my assets, is this component active? And by default it is. Active means that on begin play, the NPC will load its profile and it start its routine. There are sometimes, for gameplay purposes, situations where you don't want to have it active and you want to deactivate it and then activate it only at runtime. General settings is exactly what you would expect. You have the NPC name. I'm going to name him Bob just for purposes here. You also have the option of picking a random name from a data table. I have that off for now. Total HP, this is a regular value. In this case, is 10. Whether you want to show the HUD or not, and whether the NPC can take damage or not. And if it can take damage, do you want the NPC to run away? And if so, we have a few options here as to percent HP of running away, duration, distance, etc. Then we have a despawn delay, and that happens if you kill the NPC. It'll by default wait for 10 seconds, and then despawn animation, sounds, and whether you want the NPC to ragdoll or just play that animation. All right, then profiles. This is very important, and we're going to take a look at this once we create the profile. But basically, a profile is a list of tasks that your NPC will do. A task can be go into a house and hang around in this house for 2 hours, then go into this volume and hang out here, or follow a path, or go to a specific location in your world, or literally just stand still for X amount of time. A profile is simply a list of tasks, and we're going to be taking a very close look at a different video of all of the different options here. So once we create the profile, we're going to go ahead and add it here. Notice that we have the option under here to use time of day, and we're going to have that off by default. And if we do use time of day, then you'll notice that each individual profile has a start and an end time. And you can see that I have AM, PM, noon, and midnight to make it super clear about the times. And that's pretty much it. Home base is basically a point of interest that we're going to be calling home. And this is important because you can have a standard task or a generic task for an NPC to simply go home. And home is going to be whatever POI you specify here. NPC Manager is going to be the NPC Manager blueprint that we're going to drop in our level. And right now we have none, so that's going to be the first thing we do before we hit play here. Then we have some movement options, and this is basically how the NPC moves around the scene, how far it will search when it roams around freely, the idle time when it reaches its destination, and this is a range between 2 seconds to 8 seconds, and the search distance for navigation objects like this volume here. All right, then we have some day-night cycle options. You can check every hour. You can check when the day begins or when the night begins. You have some social options, and they're turned on by default. This NPC can interact with the player, and this NPC can interact with other NPCs, and these are going to be basically the dialogue system. Then you have some optimization settings, and they're on by default. You have a proximity system that is going to be on by default, and visibility optimizations. This is going to make sure that the NPCs are very performant when you have a lot of them in your scene. I have a simple block detection system, which is off by default. This is going to detect if the NPC gets stuck somewhere. It's supposed to be walking to its destination, and for some reason it's blocked. Maybe it got kicked off the world or whatever happened. The path is blocked. This is going to check for that, and if the NPC is blocked, it'll actually teleport to its destination as a way of correcting itself. This is important maybe for very key NPCs in your game. Think about quest givers or NPCs that are supposed to be in an area by a specific time of day, for example, and if they're not there, they're going to mess up your game. Activate it for only those key NPCs. This is an additional cost. It's a timer, and it's going to be checking, for example, every second by default. So you don't want to have this sticking on every single NPC unless they're very important. And lastly, we have here a bunch of debug options, and these are tools that are going to help you better understand what is happening with your NPC. They've helped me when I've been debugging the system, and they're going to help you understand exactly what's going on. Make sure that you fine-tune your profiles and your routines to exactly what you want. Okay, so that is it pretty much, guys. This is the general settings. So right now, let's go ahead and create a quick point of interest. This is perhaps the most complex, I guess, task that you can give an NPC. So we're going to come back here, and let's go now to the root folder of blueprints. We're going to under POIs, that's point of interest, and we're going to base classes. And you see that we have a base class here. We're going to click on POI underscore base, right click, and let's create a child Brooklyn class. Sorry about that. And instead of POI base, we're going to say POI quick start. And we can move this guy to the folder above, move it there. That way we keep this very clean. And now we have this quick start POI. We're going to drag it to the scene, and we're going to try to match it to this little house area that we have here. So actually, I think if we center it here, I made that explicitly like that. And then from there on, notice that there's two volumes here. One is an area scale and one is a player trigger. The area scale is the actual area of the point of interest. And this trigger scale is going to work if you want the POI to spawn NPCs on player proximity. And this is going to help you a ton if you're making games, because you don't want NPCs that are very far away to be doing their thing unless it's absolutely needed. So let's go ahead and increase the Y here about this. And I'm going to make it slightly bigger than the actual structure, and you'll see why in a second. But basically, this is it. You see that the inner volume is covering all of the house. And the outer volume, I'm just going to leave as is. We're not going to use. And then let's go back to base classes. And we are going to create an entrance for our point of interest. And that entrance is going to match with this little prop here. So we're going to drag it to the scene. And we are going to basically place this wherever we want this point of interest to have an entrance. It is very important that the entrance is defined inside the area, because this is going to tell NPCs that are coming to this POI where to go. They're going to come to this area right here. And notice that this is behind the prop door. That way, when the NPC comes here, it'll open the prop door on its way to the POI. If you do it like this, it's not going to work. So make sure that you put it around here, just behind the actual prop door. You can have more than one entrance, but we're just going to keep one for now. And finally, we have the POI spawner, and we're just going to put it here. And that means that the point of interest will just spawn an NPC right here in this area when the game begins, or when the player approaches the volume here. And we're going to do it that way because I think it's best practice to just have the POI spawned as the player is moving around the game. So, all right. And that is pretty much it for now. Let's go ahead and go into the stations. Go to Blueprints, Stations, and you'll see that we have a bunch of stations already pre-made, and they're all basically sample stations. But we have a base class here. And if we click here, you see that we have BP Station Base Class. So if you ever wanted to create your own custom station, all you have to do is right-click and select Create Child Blueprint. All of these here are child blueprints of that class. And let's go ahead and add just a few stations. Let's go ahead and add a little couch here. And they can be anything, by the way. I'm just picking random ones, so feel free to pick whatever you want. I'm just going to hit a little couch here. And let's grab this little workstation. We're going to keep them in the same area. That way the NPC doesn't have to walk very far. And it keeps things a little simpler. And let's do one where the NPC is idle. We're just going to put them on this area here like this. Oops. Right there. These other areas of the house will keep empty for now. So right now we have a point of interest that's basically like a little house in your game that is going to spawn NPCs here. And when the NPCs spawn, we want the NPCs to basically stay in this point of interest and use a random station. And when the station is finished, it'll just go back and keep bouncing. So that when the player comes in, it'll see that there's an NPC living his life in the house, and it's going to be doing its thing. The entrance we're going to see later on when we want the NPC to also go to this bounding box here. So it's going to have one task here, and then it's going to leave and go here, and then it's going to go back in and repeat back and forth. All right. So let's see here. We have that done, and here's the most important part. If you click on the actual POI class, you'll notice that there's a bunch of things here, lists that need to be filled out. Thankfully, I created a little utility that'll do that for you. So if you go down here and you click on Populate Elements and then Categorize Stations, you'll see that everything is already filled up here. Regular stations, they're all added here. and there's an entrance list, and there's spawners and everything. This is the recommended way of doing it. You can add them manually, but this is the best way of doing it. If you make any changes, you need to redo that step. If you add another station, you need to come back and make sure that you click populate elements and categorize stations again. Otherwise, the POI will not know that you made the change, and you'll see some weird behavior happen. Okay, so that is very important. Remember to always do that. And let's go ahead and add an NPC to spawn. So right here, there's a section called Setup Spawns, and there's an NPC list. We're going to click on the plus, and you see that we have one row here, expanded, and we have an NPC class. And if you click here, you'll see that we got pretty much anything that we can select here. Let's go ahead and type Quick Start. And notice that we have now the NPC called BP NPC Quick Start. So the NPC we created earlier, we're going ahead and spawn it here. And the number of the NPCs for this specific class to spawn, right now, we'll leave it at 1. But notice that you can have one class and you can spawn any number of NPCs inside a POI. So if you want to have an NPC to get a random name, for example, you can select that option and you can select more than one NPC, and it'll spawn how many copies of that class you want. Notice that we can add as many different NPCs as we want. And if we ever wanted to have a different NPC type, say that this is a male worker, this is a female, for example, you could have different NPC types and the numbers go separate for each NPC type. Okay? Just keep that in mind, that you can have as many different combinations of NPCs and quantities here. Notice that we're not going to spawn it on proximity. We're going to leave it off. That means it'll spawn it on begin play. And last but not least, we need to tell the NPC that that it needs to go into this point of interest, right? And that is called a profile. So if we go to the profiles area, go back to blueprints, go into profiles, you'll notice that we have, again, a base class here, and open it here. And this is the profile base class. So the same thing as before, right click, create child, and we are going to call this profile quick start and move that to the root, so to the above folder, move there. I like to keep this folder very clean. Quick start, and we're going to open this file. And really all we care about is right here under setup. And I'm not gonna go through every option again, this is a quick start, but notice that a profile is simply a list of tasks. You're gonna have a task list, the order in which those tasks are going to be executed, sequential, random, or custom, and what is going to happen when this profile ends. And you have 3 options. You want it to repeat the profile indefinitely, go home, or stay at the last task indefinitely. And by default, it just has one task. And you can see that there's different task modes here. And we're going to have it use a point of interest as the first task. And you can add a class here. And we're going to click on the plus. And we are going to we're going to type quick start. And notice that we created a point of interest called quick start. And that's what we're going to select. Compile. And that should be pretty much it. So the NPC will have this profile, will be spawned. It'll go to the profile and select the first task. And this task is going to be go to a point of interest. And it's going to go to this list and say, hey, what point of interest do I need to go to? And it's going to be the quick start point of interest. Notice that this itself is an array. So if you add more than one POI, then the NPC will select a random point of interest for the task. So you can add a lot of variability here. You could have an NPC go to one of 3 or 5 or 10 different POIs, depending on how random you want to make it. And the NPC will choose a random one here. Let's keep it at 1 so we know exactly what's going to happen. And at the bottom here, you'll see that there is a task duration range, min and max, and this is in seconds. So what's going to happen is that the NPC will stay between 260 seconds to 300 seconds, it'll pick a random number, executing this task. And when this is finished, it'll go to the next task. If there is no task, then the profile ends, and then it'll come here and say, how do we want to proceed? And in this case, it'll just repeat the profile indefinitely, so it'll go back to task number 1, in this case index 0, and go over again. If you have many different tasks here, and you have them sequentially, then you'll see that they're going to do 0, 1, 2, 3, and then ends 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. All right, that is pretty much it. And the last thing is we need to add this profile to our MPC. So if we go back to our characters, NPC, and open our NPC Quick Start, click on the component controller here, and here under Setup, under Profiles, open the profile list, and the very first profile here, we are going to select Quick Start. Notice that we have the profile Quick Start here, and that is the only profile we will have. Go ahead and compile and click on Save. The reason we want to do that here is because when the NPC spawns, we want to make sure that it immediately loads the profile. Now remember, I mentioned earlier that there's one thing that you have to have in your scene, and we haven't done it yet, and that is you need to add a NPC Manager. So let's go ahead and come to the Blueprints folder, grab the BP NPC Manager actor, and drag it here. And it can be anywhere. I'm just going to hide it and put it under the floor just for our purposes. You don't have to do anything else. You just have to have it there. Let's go ahead and click on Save All. And I'm going to delete this guy here from the scene. We don't need him. We want the POI to spawn it. So click on Save All. And right now, we'll just click on Play. And notice that we have an NPC that already spawned by default. If you go to the door and press E, that's the activation. It'll just open the door. Notice that we have the NPC here, and it's going to be in this station working for a random amount of time. And I'll show you guys that in a second. And when the NPC finishes with that station, it'll choose another random station. And in this case, it's going to be this idle station, which is going to stand here and keep going. Notice that the NPC name is named NPC, and that's because we didn't change the name here. So let's go to the general settings here. And instead of NPC, how about we pick a random name? Make it interesting. And it's going to use this data table to pick a random male name. I have another list for female names here. So in this case, we'll just keep the male name. Another thing that is cool is if we wanted to really understand what's going on for the NPC, we can come down here to the debug routine, and let's go ahead and select debug routine, and that's going to help us better understand exactly what's going on with the NPC. So if you click on play, notice that now on the left hand corner we have a nice little widget that is explaining to us exactly what's going on. Notice that we have the NPC name, the actual NPC name. In this case, he's Terry. The state is he is at a station. We have an active profile called Quick Start. We have a target POI and a current POI called POI Quick Start. We are at the station. Well, now we changed to station idle. You see the assigned station here. Then we have an index, the task time remaining, meaning that this entire task, we still have 244 seconds to go. However, for this station, we only have 8 seconds to go. It tells you which animation is playing. And notice that the animations are changing, idle 3, idle 1, etc. When the station timer ends, it'll pick another station. It'll sit here. And in this case, it spawns a random prop, which in this case is a top hat, because why not? And it's just going to kind of sit there. And that is pretty much it. How are these stations spawning the props, and how do these stations work? So let's take a quick look at the stations. So if I click on this station right here, let's take a look at some of the settings here. You have a few things here. One is general settings, and this is basically whether you want the stations to be visible, the area be visible or not, area hidden and pose hidden. This is by default. If we deselect these two, you'll be able to see in your level for testing purposes this silhouette, the yellow silhouette, and then this little area here. This is basically the trigger area of when the NPC comes here and does the work. This is probably not on by default because you don't want to see that, but for testing purposes you can come here and do that. You can add a prop mesh. In this case it's going to be this little table here. You have a nav mesh bounce volume scale. This is specifically used to tell the prop what area of the nav mesh it needs to use. You can see that we have this little area here, and this is what determines the size of this, the area that this prop will block for the nav mesh. And you can see this by pressing P, by the way. So I'll press P again and hide it. The pose mesh, you don't really have to mess around with that in the material. But most importantly, the station options here. Station type, we won't be taking a look at that in this video. We have animations, and in this case, they're going to be regular animations. And notice that we have an intro clip, loops, and outros. And in this case, we only have a loop. And if we select here, we only have one animation that is going to be played on a loop. You can add as many different loop animations or loop clips as you want, and every single time a loop starts, it will pick a random animation clip from here. Same thing from the intro and the outro. And an intro is basically a transitional animation that's going to go from a normal idle state to the looping state. It'll loop here for the duration of the task, and then it'll do the outro, and then it'll leave. And if I select the chair here, this is way more clear, because now if I go into the station options and regular, notice that we have an intro clip, which is the NPC sitting from standing. Then we have a looping clip, which is him sitting for the duration of the station. And then we have an outro clip, which is him standing up. And that's important to understand. If you have an animation that requires specific in and out states, you have to break them apart and you have to specify them here. Otherwise, the station doesn't know what animations it needs to play. This one doesn't require it, so we only have looping animations, but this one does. So make sure that you look at the different stations to really understand how things are set up. Another thing that you'll notice here is that we have sound clips, and these are sound clips that are going to be played when something happens in the animation. So in this case, we only have one sound clip, which is this hammer sound cue, and this is why when the NPC hammers, you hear that sound. And you have a bunch of options like volume, pitch, etc. And finally, you have prop list. And in this case, you can add either a skeletal mesh prop or a static mesh prop. And they are going to be spawned when the looping animation starts. And they will be attached to the socket. And here's the name of the socket. And by default, the NPC skeleton has a right hand socket that I've added and a head socket that I've added for demonstration purposes. You can add any socket you want and any prop you want, and it will just spawn it, whether it's a static mesh or skeletal mesh. It will attach it to whatever socket you want, and here it'll add a delta offset and an attached rotation if you need it to. This gives you more flexibility on how you want things to spawn. And finally, the option to spawn a random prop. So if you have more than one prop in this list, like again, if you go to the sit, for example, we see that we have, where is it? Props. Sorry, it's under regular animations because the props are tied to the animations. You see that we have two props. One is a top hat and one is a monocle. But this station has random prop. That means that instead of spawning both, we will spawn a random prop every single time the NPC sits. If you disable this, it'll spawn both props at the same time. So you have that option there. Finally, you have this duration, and this is again a range, a min and a max in seconds. So if the NPC chooses this station specifically, it'll stay in this station between 10 seconds to 30 seconds. And that is the default value for all of the stations, 10 to 30. It is a range, and you can play with those numbers. If you want a station to be super quick, obviously change the numbers. If you want a station to be really long, then obviously change the numbers as well. Couple more things, but we will not take a look at this in this video. You can use station interactions, and you saw that in the showcase video, or if you ever played the showcase level, you can have a station actually interact with other blueprints in your level, and you would activate it here. You can have a station be a one-time use only. So you may have a station that you only want it to be used once. And then after that station is used, the POI will not assign it again, at least on that playthrough. And then whether you want the animation to only play once. And this overrides the duration. So if you select this option, the station will play one animation loop, and then it'll basically end the timer for the station. And that again works really nicely with use one stations, like pressing a button once. You want the NPC to go and press the button and be done. You don't want the button to be continuously pressed when that effect should only be playing once. So those are the options there. All right, and that is pretty much it, guys. I did want to think, let's go back here. I think we covered everything. The last thing I want to cover is how to add more than one task to create a simple routine. We looked at the controller settings, we set up our POI, we have our NPC kind of go around, we went over the profile settings and the station settings, and let's take 2 minutes just to create a little routine. So right now, if we go back to our profile called Quick Start, we see that we only have one task. And that task will be between 260 to 300 seconds. Let's make this short, 30 seconds. That's it. And let's create a new task by clicking on the plus sign here. But instead of going to another POI, let's click on task mode and use a standard task. And notice that when we do that, now we can go to the standard task list, and we can select what standard task do you want the NPC to use. And let's go and select roam within nearby bounds. And what this is going to do, I'm going to click on compile and save. It is once this task inside this POI is finished, it'll do a trace and find any nearby bounds. And in this case, we have this guy right here. And it'll just go to this nearby bounds and roam inside it for the duration of the task, which in this case is going to be, let's make this also 30 seconds. And we're going to compile and click save. And now what you'll see is if I click play, and we can see this play out right here on the left-hand corner, and I'll maximize this, you'll see that the task time is 20 seconds, but the station time is, in this case, 10 seconds. So when the task is finished, it'll go to the next task, which is going to be roam in this area right here. So we see that this guy is sitting there, Terry's sitting, he stood up, he's going to another station, in this case it's going to be the idle station. But now the task ended, and he's going to leave this area here. Oops. And seems like he got stuck. So I'm going to, for the sake of the video, move him out of the way. And you can see that, I'm going to maximize here again, that he's going to the bounds area here. And once he arrives at that location, notice that the task's time started. See that 26, 25, 24, 23, etc. There you go. And then once this task time ends, then he's going back into the POI, because that would be starting over the profile. So let's just kind of wait and make sure that he does that. Notice that we also have the HP. We kind of hit him by mistake, and he has 8 HP. Now the task has ended, and notice at the bottom there's a message called profile ended, and he needs to go back to his original task, which is, hey, we need to go back into the house. And when he comes back here, he'll again be assigned a random station, and he'll keep going over and over and over because this profile is running indefinitely. The profile ends and it's going to start over at task number 1. And that is pretty much it, guys. Obviously, there's a ton of other things that are included in the asset. You can see he keeps getting stuck here. I'm gonna make sure that I make a small update here to make this basically disable collision for the door, just to prevent this from happening. But again, this is supposed to be a very simple prop. You should probably use something way better for your real game. So yeah, guys, that is pretty much it for the quick start. We went over how to create a simple NPC. We took a look at all of the different settings that you have in your controller. We set up our point of interest with an entrance and a spawner. We looked at stations and how to make sure that they're used correctly. We created a simple profile, and then we created a simple routine that the NPC can follow. That is pretty much it. Going on for the next videos, we're going to be taking a closer look at all of the different parts of the asset. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me directly here. Join our Discord and you can DM me directly. I'm pretty active there. If not, just join, because it's an awesome community and you'll see a bunch of people posting their games and discussing the different assets. So thank you guys so much, and I'll talk to you in the next video.